Nijmeh, thank you for joining me on this short video interview. Dr. Nijmeh Ali is a former colleague of mine and a close friend. Dr. Ali got her PhD from the National Center for Peace and Conflict Studies in 2018. I thought it was 2019 till Nijmeh, you corrected me. It seems like yesterday. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for particularly this time, given that your family is back in Israel. I know that you're going through a lot. So thank you very much for joining NCPACS and I around this interview.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be to be back to New Zealand, even if it's virtual.
Virtually. And we at the center miss you quite a bit. And I know that time is limited, and I want to appreciate your time as well. Part of the reason that I thought that I would reach out to you is because obviously you were with the center. Your thesis and your doctoral research was to do with Subud and your home in Israel and the Palestinian question and condition. And given the events of the recent weeks, I thought it would be germane to touch base with you and get a ground perspective, particularly for those in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who are so far geographically removed from what's happening, but also, as you know, politically and imaginatively removed as well, because it is a very, very different reality. And people here, I think, find it difficult to imagine ground conditions beyond, obviously, what they might read in the international media. So thank you for joining us. And I suppose the first question to you, Nijmeh, is, can you give us a succinct capture beyond, I suppose, what one would read in the New York Times or CNN or BBC, given your very close ground level contacts as well, around what the condition for Palestinians in Israel is like today?
You know, the story, Sanjana, of Palestine, it's not new. It's not new. It has been going on for many years. For, if I want to say, to be precisely, it's for since 48, in 1948.
Yep.
So it's an ongoing reality of conflict and full of clashes. It started with actions of ethnic cleansing years before now, when the state of Israel colonized Palestine and turned more than 85% of the Palestinians to refugees. So since then, the struggle of the Palestinians who consider themselves as the owners of the place, which is like in Arabic, we call it Ashab al-Bilad, which is equivalent in meaning to the term of indigenous people. So did not stop. The struggle did not stop. Now, it's very important to clarify that Palestinians are rebellion victims who refuse to sink in their victimization. And this is why their struggle for freedom and dignity did not stop since the conflict started. So it's not like, it's a new event that suddenly we are just like, we see in the news and the TV and all these kind of things. It's a continuing process of policies of ethnic cleansing that Israel has been used and implied on the Palestinians. So today we are witnessing, for example, the story of the Sheikh Jarrah in East Jerusalem, which is as I said, it's the continuing story of ethnic cleansing in Palestine. So just to give you one information, the people of Sheikh Jarrah originally, they are refugees from the cities and villages occupied by Israel in 1948. And now, third generation, in 2021, they are still facing the same destiny. So, so it's kind of a cumulative oppression that brought everything together. And then, we can't also take all these kind out of the context, like, the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque, especially in Ramadan time. And for the Palestinians, the Aqsa Mosque is not only a religious place. It's also a it's also a significant symbol in the Palestinian identity. So it was kind of insulting the people of the place, the Palestinians, when you attack, when you attack the mosque, when you attack the people in their more like, valuable time of the year. So regarding the Palestinians in Israel, it's very important. I think that there is misunderstanding all the time about the question, who is the Palestinians? And, a lot of international organization or people like, my friends, they ask me, how come that you consider yourself as Palestinians and living in Israel? So Palestinians, they are not only in the West Bank and Gaza Strip and refugee camps, but also we have a Palestinian minority living in Israel. We are speaking about 20% of the population in Israel, very close to 2 million people living in Israel. And I think that, the situation now, or at least this group, before continuing about the situation, they consider themselves as indigenous people of the place. And they consider themselves as the only remaining Palestinians who stayed in their homeland after the Nakba of 48. So it started with, so it's very obvious that they will show solidarity when any Palestinian group is attacked, especially when you have like, I can travel to East Jerusalem. It's 2 hours from my city, from Haifa. So, and I lived in Jerusalem for 10 years. I studied at the university there, and I have friends. So the idea is that the Palestinians in Israel, when they wanted to show solidarity with other Palestinians, other groups, they were attacked brutally by the Israeli police. And not only by the Israeli police, but also by settlers and right-wing groups, Israeli right-wing groups. And the main problem, the police didn't protect the Palestinian citizen in Israel. And we are not like, it's not new that the Israeli police does not protect the Palestinian citizen in Israel. But this time it was very, the attacks were very brutal because they entered these groups, these right-wing groups, they entered to the mixed cities. They started even to do like, to put signs on the houses or of the Arabs to know when to come back, to come again and to attack them. And so it's like, something was kind of planned before, and the police did not stop this from the beginning. And this was like, the real problem when they brought, like, it brought everyone to be involved in this clash. So this is what's going on inside Israel now. Many people are under arrest.
Yeah.
We are speaking about more than 1,000.
Well, according to the New York Times on the 24th of May, 1,550.
Yes. And the Israeli police
in 2 weeks.
Yes, and the Israeli police decided now that they are starting a new campaign to bring order back to the streets in Israel, which is like, he didn't do it in like, 2 weeks ago. Yeah. How come that? And bringing orders for the Israeli police means that to arrest more Arabs.
So I want to ask you a direct question. I think you're the best person to ask this. And the New York Times report quotes the Israeli police as saying, and I quote, that the arrests have been conducted, begin quote, to bring the rioters, criminals, and all those involved in the disturbances to justice. And they go on to say, begin quote, the majority of incidents that took place were carried out by Arab Israelis who took to the streets and attacked Jewish civilians and police officers, end quote. What would you say to that? This is the Israeli police claiming that the violence was both instigated by, architected by, and also carried out by Arab Israelis and Palestinians against Jewish Israelis. So what is going on here?
I think that, we are listening to a typical official story and narrative. This is what the Israeli police will say. They won't say that we failed to fulfill our duty in protecting people and protecting citizens, and they will not say that we went together side by side with these groups. But I'm gonna say another thing. We are blessing now in our age that we live in the digital era, so we have everything documented. And it's good that people started to use their phones to take videos and to take photos, even secretly. And this is what protect people from, like, you know, when you have a video, so you have an evidence.
Yeah.
And I think that the idea is that my reply is that there are a lot of alternative platforms that you can see a lot of information there. And this is very important for us, especially for people who are subjugated and marginalized, and they cannot reach to different media platforms.
Yeah. So I completely agree. That is a question I want to ask you later on. I'm kind of moving ahead here because one of the things that the report also suggests, and they quote an individual, a Palestinian, who says, and I quote, "I have lost confidence in the police. They will have to own it." The whole article is actually quite depressing to read, because for me, it suggests that there is an absolute lost Nijmeh of trust between communities on the one hand, and between the Palestinian community and the Israeli police on the other hand. That does not seem to be a good foundation or recipe for any kind of democratic pathway or potential.
Yeah, it's not, but it's not new. It's not new for the Palestinians. The Palestinian community in Israel, like, lost the trust with the police for many, like, you know, for the last few years. They were asking from the police, demanding from the police to, for example, to solve certain problems that we have internally inside the Palestinian community, especially when we speak about internal violence and all these kinds of things. The police refused to interfere. The police refused to come and to solve a lot of problems. So the trust is not there. It's not something that, and the police actually is part of the system. So it's part of the, and actually I'm gonna tell you something here. They are speaking only about the police, but in certain cities like Lid, there was, like, you know, they used military units in order, like, you know, to keep the Palestinians in their houses, and they put curfews, and then, like, you know, these kind of things. We're not speaking only about, like, you know, a police who's, like, you know, trying, the nice police in New Zealand who's asking you all the time if everything is okay. This relationship we don't have it with.
No, you're in a way you're speaking to the converted, because this is very much like the police back home in Sri Lanka. I think for both of us, the New Zealand, the Kiwi police are weird creatures, you know, from a different planet almost. Very nice, very polite, quite bizarre. But of course, there are, as you know, tensions between the Maori community and the police here too. Racism is not an alien construct. It is systemic here. And some of the debates in Parliament over the past fortnight here have been quite emotional around some of the issues that, of course, you and I are much more familiar with. Of course, it has very different resonances here. But I take your point that, you know, that the police there is very different, certainly, you know, quite reminiscent and resonant of the police in South Asia. But I did want to kind of go back to your earlier point of capturing narratives from the ground perspective, ground truth narratives, if you will, from, you know, whatever you have in the palm of your hand. Now, is that different, Nijmeh, to the extent that you can figure out? Because from where I'm sitting, what I've been reading is a lot of platform level suppression of Palestinian narratives and ground truth captures on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on WhatsApp. There have been organizations that have documented this, and the evidence is quite overwhelming. So you have that on the one hand, but what you're saying, and also what I'm reading, is that there is also a lot of captures on the other hand. First question is that different? Is that something that's been happening and we are only reading about it now? Or did it happen much more in the past 2 weeks? Or is, to the extent that, you know, the censorship so great that even these captures are not very helpful?
Yeah. No, I think that it's very, like, you know, it's very important to say that it goes side by side. Like, you know, once you use the platforms, like, to you know, to bring a new story or different story or even alternative story.
Yep.
But what I'm saying, that once you are using these platforms, you should know that there is also censorship that will raise and, you know, will start to think how to stop you from doing a lot of things, and how to stop you from spreading the word. So what happened during the 2 weeks, I think that we started also to use digital activism, taking into consideration these kind of censorships. And this means, for example, like, you know, people even they started to write Arabic without, like,
yes,
you know, in a
that's right.
different way.
That's right. That's right. Exactly right. So, yeah.
Just to escape,
Yeah.
you know, to convey the message, and then to escape the censorship. So people start to be more creative in terms of knowing how to use digital platforms,
Yeah.
like, you know, and turn them to digital activism. But I think also we used, it's very important to say, you know, that there is also, I think, popular activism in digital platforms, which means that when people, for example, started to rank the Facebook for 1 star, it gives a lot of, you know, it affected Facebook. So so we need all the time to have a collective activism or a collective action. And I think that in the last 2 weeks, these kind of things has been on our, like, you know, on our agenda, not just being in the street, but also knowing how to do things and how to speak to the world. And I think that the solidarity that we had from like all over the world.
Yeah, including Dunedin, by the way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw the photos from the, like, you know, photos and friends, and like on friends wall, and I think that it's very important, you know, you just like, you give, and I will tell you the truth. I think that the most genuine knowledge we can get it, like we can have it from the ground, and then you can decide, like, you know, if you want to have more information, and then you can read about it. But it's very important to bring the voices of the people who lives in this kind of context, because you know, theory is something else. And I can speak about, like, you know, I can read about colonization, like, you know, 3 or 4 books, like, you know, and all these kind of things. But it's different when you live it. It's different when you see how it affects your daily life. And I think that this is what the Palestinians, especially the Sheikh Jarrah, the people in the Sheikh Jarrah, they try to say all the time. It's not a simple term in ethnic cleansing. It's not a fancy term that is used by, like, you know, PhD students to write their PhD. It's like, it's a condition that people live.
Yeah. It's an existential reality negotiated every day.
Yes, and they want to change it. They want, and they struggle against it. So I think that it's very important. It's not the idea of digital there. You know, in 2009. In 2009, I was in Jerusalem, and there was, like, also another ethnic cleansing of houses. It's the same story. It's not something new. But we didn't have, we have some kinds of, like, you know, we had tools, we had Facebook, we had, like, different tools, but we didn't have the knowledge even how to use these tools. So I think that now we have the knowledge.
So it brings me to my next question, which is, do you think that it was, or it is, a strategic miscalculation to conduct this kind of operation in this manner, with this kind of kinetic attrition and violence? Because today there is an asymmetry, in a sense, between those who are the victims, but also have agency through the capture of their oppression against a state oppressor. So do you think that it was a strategic mistake? And if so, what are the, well, I mean, I'll ask you directly, what do you think is, because one of the things that I always say is that there's a narrative war as well. And I think you'll agree. There is, say, the Israeli police or the Israeli state or certain politicians, you know, putting out and projecting and promoting and producing, you know, in one sense, the meta narrative, the dominant narrative. But what you're talking about, and what is very evident, is the ground truth that cannot be denied. So have you seen that this in the past 2 weeks has led to maybe a pushback globally and in Israel itself that wasn't expected?
Yes, I think that, and like globally, we see the effect, because now, you know, a lot of people, many people, they are speaking now about the Palestinians in Israel and what's going on in Israel. Just to put also, like, you know, to be on the same page, I think that, you know, it's very important also to say that there has been two important documents, two important reports that were released before the events now, before these 2 weeks.
Yeah.
One of the international Human Watch, the Human Rights Watch.
HRW, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And which is international, you know, organization,
yep.
saying and determining that Israel using policies of apartheid, not
yep.
only in the West Bank and Gaza Strip,
yeah.
but also inside Israel. So
yep.
it's encapsulated in different ways,
yep.
making it more like, you know, nice in terms of political terminology, using different ways of saying things and writing this, like, you know, putting regulations. But it's basically, you know, when you prevent people from living in certain place because they are not Jewish, it means that you are practicing policies of apartheid based on you know, racism and discrimination. So it's like, so I think that, you know, people are aware of this, of these kind of reports. What happened actually, that even the people who spoke from the ground, they didn't only brought the like, you know, the story about what happened today and this kind of, like, you know, the everyday life. They also started to use the terminology that will, political terminology, certain political terminology, which is very important. They started to use the words like ethnic cleansing, colonization, settler colonial, apartheid policies, and all these kind of things. And it's important because it's captured the story. You know, you frame the story and you bring the story to the to you know, outside, like, you know, you convey your message in a way that you understand what's going on. And I think that it was surprising for the Israeli authorities because they didn't know that, like, you know, they say this is the generation of the TikTok generation. So the TikTok generation, you underestimate people, like, you know, they are not the real activists. They are not the real ones who was. But it's not. It's like, you know, we can see that this brought a lot of attention to our area. And, you know, people are now opening their eyes in Israel, like, you know, what's going on in Israel. So I think that this is what happens. But I want to say something. You know, it's not a rosy picture. I know that we are now, like, you know, the demonstration finished. We had a generous strike that everyone participated in, like generous strike inside Israel. And then in the West Bank also at the same time. So, and now we are witnessing a lot of campaigns against our young Palestinians who participated in the demonstration and in the generous strike. I'm speaking about people who wanted to use a legitimate way to protest and to say, I want, like, you know, to say and to say that I want the government, the Israeli government, to stop the military attack on Gaza. And they stayed, they participated in the general strike, and then they lost their jobs. And so I think that, you know, we are dealing with a lot of things. Sometimes it's very important, you know, in conflict studies, sometimes people, they tend to put things, you know, you know, just like, you know, to hide things or to put things under the table. I think that sometimes it's very healthy to put everything on the table. And I think that this is what's going on. So we are witnessing a lot of oppression. We are witnessing a lot of people, like, you know, they have been under, like, you know, arrested for example, like posting something on Facebook.
Yeah, no, you're quite right. And, you know, that are very confusing, at least for me. And I would imagine for the majority who look at it, there was a video on Twitter that went viral of the arrest of a 10-year-old boy while his sister was crying and pleading for his release. And he's in the car, obviously quite traumatized, and his sister is even more traumatized. And you're wondering, you know, it doesn't make sense if you cannot logically explain it. There is no explanation. It obviously suggests a degree of violence that is quite normalized, which is not, of course, a functional or democratic state.
Yes, the word is dehumanizing. You know, when you dehumanize the other side, then, you know, the tears of the girl doesn't, like, it doesn't make anything.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
Yeah.
when you, and it's, unfortunately in Israel, it's systematically
Yeah.
done by dehumanizing the other. And even the people who are Jewish, people who like, you know, even the people who, like, from their community, from the same group, doesn't follow the public opinion or the dominant public opinion. So even if we speak about the left Israelis, they feel also like they cannot speak, they are under threat.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, everyone, like, for example, the media, this video that you are speaking about, the girl was saying, I promise, in Arabic, I promise not to do anything bad. She was telling I promise you that we won't do anything bad. So what can, like, you know, 5 years old or 4 years old, like, you know, what kind of bad things can she, like, you know, do for a state, you know? So sometimes you need also to see how these kind of things goes, because it's now people can see it. You saw it on Twitter, but a few years ago, people didn't see these kind of things.
Yeah. But then you're also mindful about the fact that you know, what is systemic is not always digitally captured. It's felt, it's experienced, it's negotiated. You feel it, you live it.
Yes, and you live it. And then you can also understand it, like, you know, there is certain hidden terminology that I'm the only one I can understand it. Like, you know, if I walk in the street in Israel,
it's a code. It's a code of oppression.
It's a code. Yeah. It's a code.
Yeah.
If I see, for example, like, you know, an advertisement that people are looking for someone to work in this restaurant, and then it's enough to see that there is, like, you know, that one condition is to be 21 years old. So I can, it's immediately for me.
Yeah.
It's immediately that it's not for Arabs. It's for Jewish who finished their military service. Because they go to service in the military from 18 till 21.
Yeah.
So I know that it's not for me. They won't write, like, you know, we don't want Arabs here. It's not like.
Yeah, but they don't need to, because it signifies what the intention is signified, and it's dog whistling. Listen, Nijmeh, you know, I want to kind of come to the end of this, but, you know, we meaning Aotearoa New Zealand is well, as I said, and at the beginning of the interview, very, very far removed from the imaginative violence, the political context and landscape and terrain, and also geographically as well. So, in a sense, two questions. What should the New Zealand government be asking? What questions should it be asking, even though it may not have the answers? What are the questions that you feel they should be asking that haven't been asked to date? And what should the Aotearoa New Zealand public be thinking about primarily? Again, I don't want to, and please, if it is the case that it's already been reported, that's fine. But because you have contacts, family, friends, lived experience with the context that for so many around the world is just a news story, you have, a vested interest in perhaps communicating what the public should be thinking about and what the government should be asking about. So if you could just speak to those, in a sense, interconnected questions.
Yeah, I think that it's very important to remind ourselves that more than 60 children were killed in Gaza in this military attack by Israel. I think that the world should not sleep when there is something like this happens in other place. And this is what I also expect from myself when something, not only as a Palestinian, but as a human being, if something like this happens in other area, it should bother me. It should also let me think, what can I do in order to help to end these kind of things? I think that it's very important, when we speak about in terms of government, I think that it's very important at government and people, like international solidarity. I think that, first of all, I want to thank a lot, the Kiwis, the Palestinian and the Arab Arabs in New Zealand, and everyone who was like, you know, involved in saying something, in being in the demonstration, and bringing the case of Palestine to to New Zealand. But then, what after? This is the question. So I think that it's very important, like, you know, from the people of New Zealand to put pressure on the government to have more actions of boycotting, which is like, you know, it was used in South Africa, and I think that it's legitimate. There's no anti-Semitism in this, when, like, you know, people that are just like putting things together. We have problems with these policies of killing, oppressing, ethnic cleansing, colonizing, and this kind of thing. Like, you know, this is what I was thinking about, like how international solidarity can be more active. It's very important to be in the streets, but it's also very important to have political decisions and to be able to put pressure on Israel, because this is the only thing that can prevent. This is one of the things that can prevent Israel from continuing in her behavior. I think that also the ICC, the International Criminal Court, are trying to do a lot of things, and you know, even in these 2 weeks, the International Criminal Court in the Israeli media was like, you know, they spoke a lot about it because they were afraid that what will happen after this. So I think that these kind of things can just like put Israel in its place, and say you cannot treat other people like this way and think that nobody can punish you. And so I think that, you know, using boycotting is very legitimate way to put pressure on the government and on Israel. The other thing, I think that, you know, I don't know if you saw the Harvard University petition of, like, you know, professors from Harvard who also
I haven't seen the petition. No.
No, so they signed a petition demanding also, like, to put pressure in Israel, and they spoke, like, you know, they said that we need to use academic boycott. So there is different ways of boycotting. There is academic boycott, there's the political decision by the government. And I think in New Zealand, it's like, you know, not only New Zealand, but New Zealand as part of the international community. I think that they should bring, like, not they, if they can bring the story of Palestine in terms of, you know, bringing also, like, you know, in these kind of, you know, when I speak in these kind of meetings, it's very important.
So I'm going to read a few lines, and I wonder if you recall them. And I quote, "During the last 3 years, with its ups and downs, I kept reminding myself of the purpose of writing. Why am I writing? To tell the story is the first answer that springs to mind. Why am I writing? Because I believe that improving our world demands more bold thoughts and active action. It demands profound thinking. This expresses my deepest answer for conducting this research." Of course, those lines are the last lines of your thesis, which I had the privilege of reading and rereading many times over in the past couple of years. And I wonder, Nijmeh, as we end our conversation, in the years that you moved on from your thesis, but also as a reflection of what horrors one has witnessed just this month, the month that we are talking, what is your boldest thought? What is the active action that you think now should be taken or thought about?
You know, you know, sometimes, like, if you read, like, you know, I think that in my thesis, it's written that, you know, you cannot also expose everything, because once you expose your actions, it means that you are giving information to the other side.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that being involved, even if I'm not physically in Palestine now, I'm in France, but being involved in organizing the general strike from away. I think that it was very important. Writing and speaking to people all the time, and trying to think together what we can do and what we should do in order to keep the spirit up, but also to spread our, like, you know, the word, also to spread, like, you know, speaking to you, speaking to other people. It's very important. This is the way that we can also think together, but also like gain solidarity, think how we can change things. I think that it's like, you know, the conflict will not end today and not tomorrow. And not only the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, there is a lot of conflicts in the world, but I think that we need all the time to have a lot of hopes, and it's good to have also these kind of relationships, you know. When you are from Sri Lanka, I'm from Palestine, we met in New Zealand, and I remember that we spoke a lot about our background. I didn't know a lot of things, what's going on in Sri Lanka. We're like, you know, the main resource of my information. So I think that, you know, the self is the information now. And I think that it's very important to speak and to do these kind of things.
Thank you, Nijmeh, Dr. Ali.
Thank you for reminding me my last 4 sentences, I think.
Well, I mean, your literally your last lines. And the center, Dunedin and Otago, miss you very much. And on behalf of NCPACS, all of us, the community of staff and students, we certainly wish, and those who are so moved, pray that you, your family, your friends and colleagues back home are not just safe, but live to see the rich diversity and a more democratic pathway that for sure exists amongst the community, and one hopes is realized in our lifetimes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.